legacy means. It's what you pass down to your children and your children's children. It's what remains of you when you're gone.
Welcome back to the Legacy of Westeros, your one-stop shop for all things Westeros. I'm Sean, and that is not Zach. Zach is away on vacation right now. This is Ryan. He's joining us for the first time on the Legacy of Westeros. He's one of our staff members at Phantom Empire, and actually a newly appointed admin at Phantom Empire. Dude, welcome to the Legacy of Westeros for the first time. It's long overdue.
Hey, Sean. Thanks for having me. And I know Zach's not here today. Got big shoes to fill. I'll do my best to provide some insightful Game of Thrones content for the Legacy of Westeros here. And I'm very excited to finally be able to take part in this. I know we've been talking about it for quite some time. So it's really exciting. And I'm looking forward to getting it on.
Just think, we're a little over a year away from House of the Dragon season 2, which I know seems like it's far out, but in reality, in the entertainment industry, when something's only about a year away, you're doing pretty good. You know, it's not all that far. That being said, the topic we're talking about in this video is probably further away than any of us would like, and that is the Jon Snow spinoff show, or the Game of Thrones sequel, however you want to classify it as. That's the focus for this video, and our multiple choice question for this video is, which Game of Thrones character do you want to see return the most in the Jon Snow spinoff show other than Jon Snow himself? Is it A. Arya, B. Sansa, C. Bran, D. Sam, or E. other? Comment down below and share your thoughts there. We would love to hear what you have to say. I did not include Tormund on the list because I just thought it was a given he would be there. And stay tuned for a future video that we're going to do where I give my own take on what I would do if I was doing a Game of Thrones sequel, or more specifically, a Jon Snow spinoff set after Game of Thrones. Ryan, who do you want to see return the most, man?
Yeah, so you kind of spoiled my thunder a little bit because I had Tormund right at the top of my head. That character, as we know, is kind of the pseudo leader of the Free People, and you know, his persona, his personality, really just embodies what Game of Thrones spirit is all about. So combine him with a Jon Snow character. You know, they're very different characters, and figured they play well off of each other. But the other one from the list that I really wanted to include was Sansa. I really feel like Sansa, who is now the Lord of Winterfell, would have a lot to bring to a Jon Snow show. Obviously, we know the Wall, the Winterfell, all of those are very key areas when it comes to the Free People. Spent a lot of time building up a lot of characters, a lot of story arcs. You know, a lot of things can be driven from Winterfell, and I think Sansa as a character progressed more than any other character over the show of Game of Thrones. So, you know, if she, you know, if Sophie Turner does want to come back, and I haven't seen one way or the other, if she was interested in coming back, I really feel like the Sansa Stark character would bring a lot to the table.
I think the guy you have a hard time getting back is Peter Dinklage. I think there's a lot of resistance there, but I think money talks. And if HBO and Warner Brothers Discovery are willing to throw enough at these people, who knows what can happen with the sequel. And that's something we're going to dive into in future videos to come. Let's take a look at this article from winteriscoming.net that dives a little bit into all this. And it goes a little like this. HBO doesn't know if it will greenlight the Jon Snow show sequel, or pardon me, the Jon Snow sequel show. And well, of course they don't. You know, it's not at that point yet. So that's not really shocking news by any means. But HBO already has one Game of Thrones spinoff on the air, House of the Dragon. It has another one on the way, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, and it has several more in development, including a series that would follow up with Jon Snow after the events of Game of Thrones. On the as yet unordered series, the Jon Snow show is the one fans are most interested in, which isn't a shock. Like Game of Thrones and the cultural phenomenon that it is, and we're gonna talk about that in the first episode of Beyond the Wall, ladies and gentlemen. We're gonna put out our first Legacy of Westeros Patreon content, so be on the lookout for that. We'll just be discussing Game of Thrones and how it was a cultural phenomenon and really changed TV as we know it. But back to the article. HBO executive Francesca Orsi reminded people that it's still in the very early stages. We're just working deeply with writers to get it in shape. And don't forget, George R.R. Martin is one of those writers for a potential green light. But at this point, no determination has been made whether it can go all the way. So, in a nutshell, you get your confirmation that the show is in active development. I know people were worried when it wasn't announced this year with any of the Warner Brothers Discovery stuff, but it's still far out. And let's consider this for a fandom that talks almost, to a nauseating extent about David and Dan versus George and season 7 and 8 of Game of Thrones, and how it's not like the rest of them. Let's not forget that you're basically asking George R.R. Martin, who is actively involved in this with Kit Harrington, to go and write a sequel to the end of Game of Thrones, which wasn't his ending, and yet he is still writing his ending. That is a lot of balls up in the air. And I'm by no means a writer, dude. But when I look at that, I sit there and go, oh, how the hell is that? I couldn't imagine being George R.R. Martin working on this thing going, okay, well, I got to do a follow-up to this thing that I just didn't agree with the ending at all. And
Yeah,
it's tough.
I mean, it is tough. And I'm not a writer. I'm not very creative at the end of the day, to be honest with you. But it's amazing how quick writers have the ability to bang out scripts. Now, Game of Thrones is a very different animal versus a normal syndicated show. Obviously, George R.R. Martin, as we know, is one of the most detailed writers in existence. I mean, he doesn't shortchange anything. I think we can obviously expect a very good script when it comes. But the thing that really gives me, excitement about the possibility is, Kit Harrington brought this to the table. He brought his own team to the table, and now we know George R.R. Martin's involved. So, I mean, do we trust Kit Harrington? Do we trust George R.R. Martin? From my perspective, I do. So I think if they can, if that group works together, comes up with a good, concept for the show, what does that look like? Are we talking 2 seasons, 3 seasons, 4 seasons? Like, how big of a concept are they even trying to create? I think that really plays into if the show even has how long it's going to take, and if the show is even realistically possible, which I think it is. But again, we've seen this with HBO before. We know there is a Game of Thrones prequel. They did a pilot episode, spent $30 million, and said, you know what? Don't need it. Throw it in the garbage. It's done. So, I mean, until you see something in the can, there's a lot of concern if it's ever going to happen. But knowing how popular Jon Snow is, I think it will happen. It's just a matter of when.
I think it's their gravy train. We're going to take some time with this. We're going to milk it a little bit. We're going to make sure we get it right. And when we really need it, it's going to be there. I hope it's not 10 years from now, because that's not the indication we've been given thus far. But we'll have to wait and see how this all plays out. Again, the scale of the show is going to greatly depend on the direction of the story. Is it basically going to be a Game of Thrones successor show where we're spending a lot of time in Westeros, whether it's Beyond the Wall or, King's Landing and Winterfell and all these places that we're used to? Or are we going to go somewhere we haven't seen before that someone else might have gone to at the end of Game of Thrones? And we'll talk about that more on another video, because that's my whole pathway to a Jon Snow spin-off show that's not the scale of Game of Thrones is he's pretty attached to one of his siblings, and one of his siblings just went off into the unknown. And I'll go over a detailed outline on what I would do with that in a future video. Well, we will watch with great interest and see which way this goes. Hey, there's a writer's strike going on right now. So guess what? In terms of getting this thing sooner, that isn't helping things. That's slowing it down massively when you're in such early development. So don't be surprised if this writer's strike adds another. I'm not saying the writer's strike's going to last a year, but don't be surprised if the effects from the writer's strike back to show up yet another year. That's what I would expect at the very least anyways. If you haven't yet, like, comment, subscribe, slash the bell, as long as it's not going to make you go crazy and burn down King's Landing. It would be greatly appreciated. Share the channel with friends of yours if they're a fan of Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon, Night of the Seven Kingdoms, Westeros in general. This is a place for all Westeros fans. For Ryan, I'm Sean. Don't forget that the night is dark and full of terrors.
Do you know what legacy means? It's what you pass down to your children and your children's children. It's what remains of you when you're gone.